No, here, not sent.
Oh. Okay, I need Wi-Fi. That's the issue.
This is, it's, there's no password. Just, the Insight Partners guest.
Thanks, okay.
Hey, yes, very good. Nice to meet you, everyone. I'm Noam. I'm the field CTO at groundcover. For those of you who doesn't understand what field CTO means, it took me a while as well. Essentially, I'm kind of an engineer. I was the first engineer in the company, but then I went to the dark side of sales. So I'm like trying to be honest with the customers and prospects, but all of a sudden I'm like into deals and go-to-market statements. What this conversation is about. Essentially, we all stopped reviewing code. I think that's like the simple take here. I feel like we're not at meetings, like we're talking about how great it is to develop code with agents, how everybody's 10xing, but behind the surface, the huge part of the iceberg that is still below surface level is that nobody's actually checking what is being deployed to production, at least not the way it used to be. So essentially, I don't think we need the hot take is that we don't need a code review. It's kind of like a marketing trick, and if you're all here, you kind of fell for it. But what I'm essentially saying is that code review, the way we used to do code reviews, are just no longer relevant, and where many of us are just rubber stamping pull requests and diffs into production. Why I say this? This is me. Now, obviously, this is not me. What I did, I took my LinkedIn picture and I asked Gemini, which is state-of-the-art model, at the point where at least I did this test, and to make my picture more LinkedIn worthy. This is what I got. This is the state-of-the-art LLMs that we are all using to push code to production. This is like how amazing things are behind the scenes. Now, if you can tell me that you have all the ability to say, to differentiate that the code that Cloud Code generated for you is actually correct, and maybe this is just a fluke, amazing. I don't think that any of us not being part of Anthropic or kind of like LLM masters can actually say it. This is a pull request based on these LLMs. It contains 31 chats, conversation between bots. We use, for example, CodeRabbit and Buzz. It stretches over 35 files. And it wrote a beautiful description, which obviously no one wrote. And then someone just, sent it to me. And oh, can you take a look over this? This should be like quite simple. You think that I just dived and internalized this diff? I can tell you two things that happened. I did not internalize this diff before I proved it, and also the engineer that internalized this, that submitted this diff did not internalize it. This happens every day, thousands of times just in one organization. As a result, this is what happened to GitHub as well, as part of this 10x revolution. This is GitHub uptime in the last 90 days. It's below 90%.
They're almost at
below
5 nines again.
SLA,
89.9.
I'm going to get fired at the very least. What is happening? We're just shipping more code than ever. We're working until the same assumption that we can check that 10x code that we're generating, and it's no longer simply true. Now let's do a quick timeline of what happened. So we started in the QA, we had a QA era, right? Like human wrote code, and we had literally we had the privilege of having dedicated humans to do software checking, which is amazing. Like, imagine the privilege of having this today. And then we kind of all adopted TDD and adopted we read the Phoenix project and learned about Martin Fowler and Uncle Bob, and we were all very happy that we can conquer the world with test. So we were like, okay, we don't need to do QA anymore, right? We can just write tests, and someone can read tests, someone can run the test, and we can all get assurance about what's happening. That was nice, kind of work. We started to see that our applications are breaking to some extent, but we were all fine with that. And then we reached the agent era, where humans are no longer write code, they use agent X to write code, and then human B is checking code with God knows what agent. Maybe it's not even a good idea that they will do it with the same harness and with the same model, because guess what will happen with Claude with the same skills? We'll check the code that Claude with the same skill also wrote. Amazingly agree. Wow. Who would have thought that this will happen? And also, it may be not a good idea if someone who uses cheaper model to check a code that a state-of-the-art model wrote. Maybe also it will elucidate problems that don't really exist, but no engineer can really tell that these issues no longer exist. Generating code is easier than checking. The code that we're actually shipping is go through a completely different mental process, and this is, I think, the key take here. Completely different mental process than the mental process that we use to ship code so far. And we have even no reference for it. What we are all doing now to our software is something that has no baseline. It's the first time in history that we ship software the way we ship software. There's no reference to this process of shipping software. There are a lot of ideas that we're going to discuss shortly, but the big question after all this intimidation and all this hot takes so far, who owns this mess? What is left from ownership here? Who is it? The reviewer? Is it the engineer that shipped the code? Is it the company? Is it LLM to blame? Is it culture to blame? Can we solve it even with culture? Essentially, what I'm saying, and the biggest question that this all boils down to, is how do we re-establish trust in the era of developing code with AI? And this is, by the way, this is not kind of a conversation that you're going to leave with enlightened about what you should do. I don't have answers. I'm contemplating this idea, even just the minutes before I started this talk. But some of my rough thoughts about what's happening. I think that one of the core assumptions were that we thought that if we understand the code that we read, we will understand the behavior that it's going to express in production. Now, I think that what happens now in startups, or at least in companies that ship code at lower volumes compared to companies, let's say like Meta or AWS or Google, and I think they actually experienced that before, is that we can no longer predict the behavior. And what we essentially did without even admitting it, we were not, our ability to vouch for a code that was shipped was not based on a deterministic process. We can't say, yeah, this is going to work. We had kind of an approximation mechanism internally that we guessed that this is going to work. And usually because code and our ability to understand it correlated heavily when we wrote the code manually, that approximation function worked, let's say, 95%. If you're a senior engineer, very good at what you're doing. And when junior engineers shipped code or approved it, let's say it was 80% success. This is no longer true, and this approximation function that we're using to test that code is going to work as we expect is just, in my opinion at least, I think it's just falling below a bar that even senior engineers are not no longer potentially capable of vouching for, even in smaller companies. So how do we regain this attestation? How we create a new approximation function? So I usually leave room for ideas here, but this is a lightning talk, so I will just do this talk without manners. But idea number one. So people kind of try to let's do LLMs as a judge, let's diversify the LLMs, let's challenge the harness that we use to do code reviews, let's purchase 2 licenses like we did for code reviewers, so we do Buzz and CodeRabbit. We know, we still have reviewer number 2 as part of the process. This is nice, but this is not an hermetic process, right? This is not something that we can say that just by doing this creates entropy, good entropy. But this is not a tactic or a strategic achievement that will solve the issue. Idea number 2 is culture, and this is potentially where most of the answer lies in, but this is a very I would say company-specific conversation to have. But their job of to put it shortly, first of all, the role and the scope of an engineer within a company changes. The most, maybe let's say, LinkedIn worthy change that some of you have seen is that Anthropic engineers are not engineers, because like we need something cooler, right? They are members of the technical staff. And you have also companies that are just like abstracting it, like I'm an engineer at a company. Maybe we're soon going to see like I'm a human at Meta or like stuff like that. Maybe, I don't know. So the KPIs change. By the way, the Hubs, I believe this was the CEO or the CTO of HubSpot. He wrote a really good blog about the KPIs in the agent era. Suggest everybody to read it. And yes, like my fellow speakers talked about it here, everybody is kind of like the manager of their own agents now. I would say though that also another point about culture that is not written here, and it's very, it should definitely be here, is the idea of ownership, and especially day two ownership. My take, another hot take that I have at least, is that the number one mental fallacy that project management solutions created is the tickets and we're done. Calling the last column in a project management solution done, let's say in Monday, in Jira, in Linear, whatever you use, just created the idea that when we shipped, we were done with the feature. This is like the worst idea of ownership to implement in an organization, especially in an organization that try to move fast or where engineers are being abstracted to something that has a larger scope. Features only starts where they hit production. Don't end when they are shipped into the main range. You just started the way. You had zero, in this feature has zero interactions before you put it in main. It's now just became worthy of actually running in meaningful environments. Idea number 3, and we're going to tap into this point a little bit more towards the end of this conversation, and how it obviously connects with groundcover, which is an observability company, because I'm a field CTO, so like marketing kind of like regarding tests. So tests are also a part of this solution and the cultural change essentially that we need to create. But I would say it this way: if we used to Slack and when we wanted to deliver fast, and we were kind of like skipping tests or like testing thoroughly, especially if we gave it to some reviewer that we know is like senior, like we explained the test that we did manually, but team pressed to deliver this feature quicker. This is no longer an excuse with AI. Like agents really lower the bar for delivering tests as part of your code. So I would say that philosophies like TDD and like being dedicated to writing tests is no longer like a luxury or something that you need to religiously commit to. This is something that should be more and more implemented as an obvious expectation as part of writing software. The question is, are we adding more tests? Are we also, like, when we incentivizing tests, are we also going to create the same issue of incentivizing kind of like a garbage in, garbage out situation where people are just going to write tests without thinking about them truly, and those are not going to be meaningful tests, and then they are going to put more stress or like more load on the mental, on the reviewer while they review the code, because now they review like 10 times more literal like text when they review those tests. Idea number 4, and this is something that we started to experiment with, at least with the agent that we write, we develop internally for groundcover and to do tasks, is observability. So if a feature is only done once it hits production and it experiences like good, real, organic data to interact with, this needs to be part of the loop. Now, observability was something that, first of all, historically was kind of like groomed in separate areas in companies, like it belonged to the SREs. For example, now we see in the number one, I think, evidence of this is that we created a pillar called AI SRE as a dedicated pillar, which is definitely needed question is why this is not a manifestation of literally connecting the observability platform that you already have into that loop of the developer lifecycle. There's no longer an excuse not to do so. So when we do it, first of all, we create two things. First of all, we create a cultural change in the company, the cultural change that we discussed, that engineers own the application after it is being shipped to production. And second, that loop now gains test gets data that now that and senior engineers and engineers in the company cannot really at this point should admit that they cannot predefine or plan for it during the planning stage. So tests essentially are now evolving to this concept, and we see it first of all with the company or other observability companies. For example, Datadog just released it, called experiments. So we're essentially baking the experiment culture into the development lifecycle. This is, by the way, a practice that is already known and implemented in companies like Meta, in other big tech companies that engineers are at the focal point of those companies' cultures. Experiments is a given part of the development lifecycle. And I think this is actually a good opportunity, and with AI, we can start importing this concept to companies that didn't have like the, let's say, the capacity to do this to the extent that the bigger tech companies have done. So final thoughts before I conclude. Code reviews, the way we thought about them at least, were never about reviewing code. They were about gaining trust when we are going to deploy a new function into production. That's what they were about. Culture is about trust. What we do when we establish an engineering culture in a company, that main KPI for an engineering culture is, can we trust the output of that engineering function within the company? Trust, that ability to achieve trust within an engineering organization is now not just based on people reading code, people vouching for code. It's about coverage, it's about trial and error, and it's about the data ownership. And this is again, and there might be more, and again, maybe Fable or like the next generation of Fable is going to make this conversation meaningless because there are no longer going to be any engineers left, maybe, but this is where we're kind of at now. Thank you so much, that was my lightning talk. If you want to learn about groundcover, this is the QR code. For those of you who don't know, I don't think I introduced the company at the beginning. We're an observability platform. I also like to think about us as a wellness company due to the unreliable amount of evidence that we cure anxiety with CFOs that pay Datadog. It's a fully agentic platform, and it is free to start and free to try. So